dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. Let's go ahead and start with this net neutrality nonsense, as I call it, the old triple N. We now have a full-blown debate caused by progressives, and I blame progressives for everything, because whenever there is a reason to throw mud in the water, to muddy things up so that nobody can get clarity, you can depend upon progressives to do that. Now, net neutrality are some rules that were passed in 2015 or adopted by the FCC in 2015 under Barack Obama. However, they have been recently repealed. Back on the 12th of December, ABC News did a fair job of trying to explain, at least from one perspective, what net neutrality was about. Because a lot of people who are out there discussing this thing really don't have a good background on the whole topic. Here's ABC News.
Net neutrality, or the open internet, is the idea that internet service providers, or ISPs, are considered common carriers or public utilities. That means that ISPs must provide access to all websites and data equally, regardless of their content. Let's say you're streaming your favorite show from website 1, watching sports on website 2, and reading the news on website 3. Under the current regulation, ISPs are legally required to provide those sites to you at the same speed. Opponents of the current regulation claim the ISPs would recognize that you like website 1 and allow the website or the consumer to pay a premium to fast-track the streaming from that site. Ajit Pai is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, which regulates communications by radio, TV, wire, satellite, and cable. He thinks rolling back the regulation will help investment, innovation, and job creation by creating more flexibility for ISPs. Supporters of the current regulation claim ISPs could take that information and slow down streaming, what's called throttling, of your favorite show from website 1. That would encourage you to watch shows on website 2 or 3, where you previously preferred to watch sports or read the news. The FCC will vote on December 14, 2017.
Well, we need to treat the ISPs, the Comcast and the Time Warner Cables of the world, like monopolies. The same way you treated AT&T. There was a time when it was known as Ma Bell. Is that good? Help me understand why it could possibly be good. And so when you hear the discussion back and forth, it's, well, you're going to screw the consumer. You're going to hurt the consumer. You're really going to mess up. This is basically class warfare, pitting the providers who have been allowed to become rather large, against consumers, and that only the FCC has the capability to protect them. Really? Is that what you think? Obviously, some people do. On the 14th, net neutrality was repealed by the FCC in a 3-2 vote. It was brought in 2015 with a 3-2 vote. So the idea that now you've changed the power structure in the executive branch who appoints the FCC commissioners, it's really not surprising that it was voted down. Here's what happened on that day, and this was reported by CNET regarding the repeal.
The votes are in and net neutrality is out. The FCC voted 3-2 in favour of repealing rules designed to make internet providers treat online traffic and services equally. But it wasn't without some drama. Before the vote, the room was briefly evacuated because of a security alert. And during the hearing, fiery statements were made against the repeal by Commissioner Mignon Clyburn.
I dissent. Some may ask, why are we witnessing such unprecedented groundswell of public support for keeping the 2015 net neutrality protections in place? Because the public can plainly see that a soon-to-be toothless FCC is handing the keys to the internet, one of the most remarkable, empowering, enabling inventions of our lifetime, over to a handful of multi-billion-dollar corporations.
In response, Chairman Ajit Pai had this quip.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. I'm going to mark you down as a no. So that's
Commissioner Michael O'Reilly followed up with his statements supporting getting rid of the rules.
The legend of a cable company trying to break the internet may make a scary bedtime story for children of telecom geeks, but it isn't reality. So, for those of you out there that are fearful of what tomorrow may bring, please take a deep breath. This decision will not break the internet.
Now the vote has been taken, the repeal has to be entered into the Federal Register, and that's expected to happen early next year. So will the internet look any different tomorrow? CNET's Maggie Reardon explains.
The changes that a lot of people fear are going to happen slowly, and it's going to happen when broadband providers and wireless companies start to change their business models. So you're not going to notice anything probably for quite some time.
The vote happened just one day after New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman reported that 2 million comments submitted to the FCC about net neutrality were made under misused identities. Earlier in December, Schneiderman, along with 28 senators, called on the FCC to delay the vote until the fake comments could be investigated. The FCC rejected these requests to delay the vote, but Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel addressed concerns in her statements, saying 500,000 comments were submitted using Russian email addresses. She said, quote, "I think that's a problem," end quote.
Interesting that any time, particularly now in the Trump era, that something that progressives do not like occurs, we have to find a way to get Russia mentioned in all of this. Let's look at this realistically. You heard Mignon Clyburn talking about, well, we're going to hand this thing over to a bunch of... Okay, really? Let's talk about some myths. Entrepreneur.com put out on the 14th of December, Understanding Net Neutrality, 5 Myths Debunked. Here's myth number 1. That the debate is between those who favor net neutrality and those who oppose it. That's not true. All sides in this debate strongly support an open internet with policies that protect consumers. The argument revolves around the legal authority of the FCC or the authority that they would use to enforce those rules. Myth 2, consumers are now at the mercy of the evil ISPs now that the Title II net neutrality rules are repealed. That's not true. The repeal actually strengthens consumer protections by placing one watchdog, the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, over the entire internet. The top agency in charge of protecting consumers from shady business practices of all kinds, the FTC, has a proven 2-decade track record of carrying out this responsibility. And they can do all this without the destructive investment dampening baggage of Title II. We'll get back to that investment dampening. Myth number 3, the FCC is trying to kill net neutrality. Like all parties involved, the FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, is committed to net neutrality. He opposes regulating consumer broadband service like a utility. Bear that in mind. Do you remember, most of the people who are arguing about this today do not remember when AT&T was effectively a utility. And we're not talking about the local phone company. We're talking about you. If you made a phone call from one state to another, no matter how you did it, you were using AT&T. So, Ajit Pai opposes regulating consumer broadband service like a utility. If you understood anything about what happened when Ma Bell was in her heyday, you might understand. The December vote ending Title II moves consumers one step closer to a fair, modern protection system ensuring an open internet for all Americans. In other words, it's the exact opposite of what they're saying. We need protection. Monopolies don't protect anyone but the company that is holding the monopoly. Because if you want them to operate that way, they will dictate to the government the financial terms by which they will do so. Well, you got to get rate increases. And if you don't give them the rate increases, since you've gotten rid of their competition, please explain to me what leverage the government has when there's only one game in town. We want a 20% rate increase. What we actually want is a 15. We'll ask for 20 so that you'll feel like you're doing something when we back down to the 15% that we want when all we need is 10. And if there were competition, they'd find a way to get by with less. But there isn't. Another myth, Title II utility regulation doesn't hurt broadband investment. It doesn't take an economist to figure out that shoehorning 100 pages of 1930s regulations, because that's what they did to regulate AT&T, into modern consumer broadband services is hardly a stimulus plan. Since Title II was imposed on broadband networks in 2015, investment has declined even as internet traffic has increased. You know what happens when investment declines as usage increases? You end up with AT&T. Do you remember the 5-pound phone that used to sit on somebody's desk? There was no innovation with the phone. You thought it was a big deal when AT&T allowed you to put a phone on the wall. They actually installed it in the wall. There was no innovation. There was no investment because nothing ever changed. And there was no impetus to do so. Net neutrality protections should work for consumers, innovation, and investment in better, stronger networks for us all. But you can't do that until you get rid of the 2015 rules. Myth. Today's leading internet companies like Amazon, Google, and Netflix would not exist without the Title II regulations passed in 2015. How long have Amazon, Google, and Netflix been in existence? Are you serious? The companies that we're talking about grew to global supremacy in the absence of these rules. Do you understand? You're being played. Everything they're coming at you with is just a lie. Now, interestingly enough, the Senate Democrats are going to force a vote on this FCC net neutrality repeal. That came out on the 15th from Reuters. Chuck Schumer said on Friday he would force a vote on the FCC decision to repeal landmark net neutrality rules, but the move was unlikely to block a ruling that could reshape the digital landscape. He knows it's going nowhere. Why? Because it has to go through the Senate. It may get through the Senate. Who knows? There are enough progressives with an R after their name in the Senate to basically have a vote. It's not going to make it through the House. It's definitely not going to get signed by the president. So this is a grandstand move. But why are they doing it? Have you ever gotten this idea that somebody is really trying to mess with you? Let's address this nonsense, because it is progressive nonsense, a little bit more directly. Net neutrality is a reworking of the old equal time rule from 1927. Take everything else economic out of your mind, because this is getting to what it's really about. 1927 equal time rule, which was to ensure that all sides of political debate were aired to the public. That thing's still on the books, but it was temporarily suspended in 1960 to allow the Kennedy-Nixon presidential debate. Because if they hadn't repealed it, you would have had to have everybody who was trying to run for president be involved in that debate, which would have been a headache at the time. In 1949, the FCC got into this with the fairness doctrine, which was to ensure controversial topics were presented in a balanced manner, at least in the opinion of the FCC. Neither the equal time rule nor the fairness doctrine gave you any pretense that they weren't political. They were entirely political. Why? Because America is not a left nation. It is a center-right nation. Pretty much always has been. You went to equal time because left to the normal market forces in America, the progressive or left-leaning side would never see the light of day. There really aren't that many people who are interested in it. If you don't believe me, look at the ratings. Where is MSNBC compared to Fox News? And Fox News is actually rapidly moving to the left. But before you had all the sexual harassment allegations, which I don't necessarily believe hardly any of them, look at the ratings. Fox News was considered right of center. MSNBC was considered left of center. Nobody is watching MSNBC, comparatively speaking. They sucked in the ratings. But the equal time rule guarantees that they will actually be on the air. The fairness doctrine helps them stay on the air. And people are acting from, every time they bring up this whole thing about, well, what's going to happen to the poor consumers? The FTC hasn't gone anywhere. The Federal Trade Commission is not moving a muscle. And they have a 20-year track record of dealing with this type of thing. They're going to do fine. The progressive lie, and it is a lie, since 2015 is that these net neutrality rules are about anything other than making cyberspace safe for their political ideas. Right-wing talk radio, much more popular than left-leaning talk radio. Left-wing TV and movie content is declining in popularity for the same reason. Americans are, as a group, they're not leftists, even though the content producers in Hollywood generally are. Net neutrality is meant to ensure that you can't escape progressivism on the World Wide Web, like equal time kept it before the nation's radio listeners, and like the fairness doctrine kept it before the nation's TV viewers. It is an assault on the majority political perspective of the American electorate. Any attempt to portray this as some type of assault on consumers is a lie from the pit. Nothing's going to happen bad as a result of net neutrality. Something's going to be different. There could be a rise in prices over the short term. But I want to remind you of something. There was a time when your choices with regard to telephone service was so limited that you could produce a commercial that sounded like this.
One of the first things we tell our players is keep in touch with their families. And when our freshmen first arrive, we ask them to write a postcard home right then. You know, we keep them pretty busy, but they always have time to pick up the phone and call. And it's real important to keep in touch. Have you called your mama today? I sure wish I could call mine. Reach out and touch someone.
That was an AT&T commercial with Paul Bear Bryant, the legendary coach at Alabama University. That was made back in the late 70s, early 80s. Call your mama. it's important that you keep in touch. Call your mama. Do you know how bold you have to be able to make a commercial that says, use our service? Not telling you about how good the service is. Not telling you about how they're better than the competition. There was no competition. Call your mama. Just call her. Because I know as soon as you do, you're going to pick up this phone that I gave you and call over these lines that I gave you. And you're going to spend more money on a 3-minute phone call in those dollars, in those days, than people pay for a gallon of gas today. I'm not worried about net neutrality. I'm worried about the progressives who want their content treated the same as other content that's more popular. Let the market and the American public decide what matters most to them. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's talk about this. Wow. Well, let's just put it this way. There's the political sexual harassment body count has now caught more than a few progressives. And that's a problem. Because progressives created this little monster in a lab all the way back in 1991 when they went after Clarence Thomas. It didn't work, but they had a way of saying, you know what, not everybody has the ability to persevere that Clarence Thomas does. So that when they trotted it out on people like Herman Cain, he folded like a chaise lounge. They trotted this out again. Who was that? Gary Hart, who was not quite a progressive Democrat. He was kind of a maverick in the Senate, and they caught him on the monkey business with Donna Rice, and they took him out. He had to fold. They had put together a way. I think someone, one of my associates on Facebook called it lawfare, where we actually don't go to court, really. We just put something out there that you can't really defend, and I don't really have to prove, but it makes you look like you're a criminal. So who are we talking about now? Well, we have John Conyers, who was revealed as a dirty old man. And actually, I think that's pretty legitimate. It's been known for decades that don't be alone with John Conyers. He's going to do something. He's going to show you something that you really don't want to see. He's going to put you in an uncomfortable spot. Al Franken went down, but Al Franken, dude, they got a picture of you feeling up some woman while she's unconscious. And you tried to say you didn't do anything as a senator, and we just keep popping up with women who are saying, yeah, well, I took a picture with him, he had a handful of my backside. Or I took a picture with him, he was cupping my breast. Could some of these women be lying? Sure. But, man, you don't have a lot of credibility. You really don't. And this thing has gotten so out of control that they actually have nailed a woman, a progressive woman, white woman, has gotten caught up in this. Andrea Ramsey, who was trying to flip a congressional district in Kansas from Republican to Democrat, got hit with a sexual allegation revelation from her past, and now she has dropped out of the congressional race. So it's out of control. And she's complaining, well, the Democrat Party has a zero tolerance policy now. Really? I still keep trying to figure out how the Democrats are so into protecting the rights of women, and they still allow Bill Clinton to breathe free air, even politically free air. Well, we've kind of moved on from the Clintons. After 2 terms as president, and after you contorted your nomination process 2 separate times, once in 2008 and failed to get the nomination, and then again in 2016 and failed to win the presidency. You went through 4 rotations of Clinton before you finally decided, yeah, maybe it's time to move on. And still no one has gone after Slick Willie. Amazing. It doesn't stop there, because now we have another member of the Congressional Black Caucus, whom I call the Clown Brown Caucus. Bobby Scott got accused by some woman who looks remarkably to me like Anita Hill, and who happens to be a lawyer who specializes in sexual misconduct advocacy. M. Reese Everson says that he inappropriately touched her leg and body without permission back in 2013, and said that he could advance her career if she allowed him to have his way. And then she says she was wrongly terminated that same year, 2013. Here is the problem. Let me make sure people are clear about this. I have no respect, no regard, no positive thought in any way, shape, or form about any member of the Clown Brown Caucus. I despise black progressivism. That said, Bobby Scott's been in public life for 40 years, and where are his accusers? This one? And you believe her? 40 years, not 4 years, not 40 years, longer than this woman who's accusing him has likely been alive. And there's no smoke on his name that I'm aware of, which I'm aware. But now you believe this woman? The heck, get out of here with that foolishness. I would that every member of the Clown Brown Caucus got run out of town during next November's elections. But this ain't the way to do it. It just isn't. Now let's go on, and oh, by the way, this isn't limited to just what's going on in politics. This all started, or seemingly started, the Mushroom Clown formed over Harvey Weinstein. And we have some black progressives going down in the entertainment sector. Although some would try to call them journalists, I would not. Roland Martin, a very outspoken black racist, and that's exactly what I consider him to be, he is going to lose his show later this month. Now, no one seems to be alleging sexual misconduct against Roland Martin. Just wait. We'll see. We'll see. He seems to be taking it rather well that he's moving on. I wonder why. Maybe there isn't, but we'll see. The other one that is interesting is a very opportunistic individual, and I put that in the kindest terms possible, named Tavis Smiley. He has a show on PBS. I think it's a daily show on PBS that comes on late night. But it seems like that's not the case anymore. This is what happened on the 14th of December.
PBS suspended its late-night talk show Wednesday after misconduct allegations were made against the show's host and namesake, Tavis Smiley. In a statement, the public broadcaster said an outside law firm hired to investigate accusations against Smiley uncovered multiple credible allegations of conduct that is inconsistent with the values and standards of PBS. PBS did not provide any details about those allegations, but unnamed sources told Variety the investigation found Smiley had engaged in sexual relationships with multiple subordinates. Smiley denied the allegations in a video posted to Facebook. Back in November, PBS terminated its relationship with Charlie Rose after the TV host and journalist was accused of making unwanted sexual advances toward multiple women. The Tavis Smiley Show premiered on PBS in 2004.
Allegations. What is a credible allegation? Is that the same as a proven allegation? No. And it found that he had engaged in sex with multiple subordinates. How was that proven? Or was it? Are you starting to pick up on something here? Now, in response to this, Tavis Smiley did post a video to Facebook in which he said the following.
Hi, I'm Tavis. I was as shocked as you were to hear of PBS's sudden announcement regarding my television program. Let me say at the outset that I have the utmost respect for all women, and I certainly celebrate the courage of those women who've come forth of late to share their own truth. But let me also assure you that I have never groped, inappropriately exposed myself, or coerced any colleague in the workplace ever in my 30-year career. PBS launched this so-called investigation of me without ever even telling me about it. I only learned of this investigation because former colleagues, former staffers, started to call me to tell me they were getting a phone call from some PBS investigator asking, number one, did Tavish ever make you feel uncomfortable in the workplace? And number two, can you give us other persons to call? Only after threatening a lawsuit did PBS investigators agree to sit down and talk to me for 3 hours. And even then, their minds must have been made up, because almost immediately after that session ended, this story broke in Variety. PBS investigators refused to look at any of my documentation, refused to talk to any of my current staffers, refused to give me the names of any of my accusers, and refused to give me any semblance of due process. It is clear that this has gone too far, and I, for one, intend to fight back. PBS overreacted, and they launched a sloppy investigation. It's time for a real conversation in this country about where the lines are, about how men and women can engage each other in the workplace. And I look forward to actively participating in that conversation.
You want a real conversation about this? You bar companies from acting on allegations that are unproven. You cannot take workplace actions against anyone who has an unproven allegation. You say to these women and even the male accusers this: either take it to court or take it to the grave. We're not trying to hear this. You are trying to mess up somebody's career. You are trying to mess up somebody's livelihood. You are trying to tarnish someone's reputation just on your say-so. And some of this stuff happened so long ago. I'll give you two things. One, take it to court. And two, you got 6 months. After that, the statute of limitations is up, and we're not hearing it. As a matter of fact, there are going to be repercussions for people who do not take it to court and do not file their grievances within 6 months. And then we'll see who's serious. We'll see who really got harassed. You're trying to silence people. No. I'm trying to make sure that innocent until proven guilty remains something that is of value in this country. Because right now it's not. It is, you're okay as long as a woman doesn't have anything bad to say about you. That's pretty much it right now. That's ridiculous. He says he wants to have a real conversation. Then you need to get terms like, women coming forward and telling their truth. There is no their truth. The truth does not have an owner. The truth is simply that. People bow to it. The truth does not bow to them. Speaking of bowing, let's go back to Hollywood, where this mushroom cloud formed over Harvey Weinstein. And CBS News filed a report Saturday, I think it was Saturday, about a commission that's being formed.
Some of Hollywood's most powerful executives are funding a new commission to fight sexual harassment. As Carter Evans reports, they've appointed a well-known figure to run the commission.
Some of the biggest influencers in the entertainment industry are joining forces to combat sexual misconduct in Hollywood by forming the Commission on Sexual Harassment and Advancing Equality in the Workplace.
But this was the big unveiling.
Matt Bellany, editorial director of The Hollywood Reporter, says the commission grew from a meeting called by Star Wars producer Kathleen Kennedy.
Kathleen Kennedy is a major figure within the Walt Disney Company, and I think that was key to getting some of these big CEOs on board.
The long list of supporters includes top executives at Paramount, CBS, Disney, Netflix, Amazon, and many others, as well as the leaders of high-powered talent agencies. And it will be chaired by Anita Hill.
I never believed 1991 was the end.
Hill became a national figure when she accused then Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment. She recently spoke at an event supporting the Me Too movement.
Everybody who has participated in this movement and that will somehow step up and make it where we should have been 26 years ago.
The commission's formation follows a cascade of sexual harassment allegations in Hollywood that began with accusations from dozens of women against movie mogul Harvey Weinstein.
This is by far the most aggressive step we have seen. This is the one they are going to put forth as a code of conduct for the industry to help combat this issue.
Is it enough that the commission can be held accountable, do you think?
I think the accountability question is the key question here, because it's all talk until there are actual consequences for this behavior.
Members of the new commission told us they aren't doing interviews yet, but Rena, they plan to reconvene early next year and say more announcements are coming soon.
So they're going to launch a witch hunt with the head witch from 1991. Why do I say that? Look, if you saw the hearings, the confirmation hearings for Clarence Thomas, there's only one thing you could do. One of these people had to be lying. There is no way that both of their stories had significant elements of truth. Someone was simply wrong because they were diametrically opposed. And the Senate determined, despite the efforts of Dead Kennedy, Senator Dead Kennedy of Massachusetts, who dug up Anita Hill to railroad him out of the position, that she was in fact incorrect. They didn't want to come out and say it, but their vote made it clear. To bring her back now, after having been demonstrated as someone who is not credible 26 years ago, tells you all you need to know about all this Me Too foolishness. This is simply, how do we get rid of powerful and influential men in positions we don't want them to have? Now, are some of them dirty? I didn't say they weren't. But to go back and find stuff from 10, 20, 30, longer, years ago, and say that's the reason why today you should not have a position, that is ludicrous. And the result is an emasculated society, and there has never been a successful or dominant culture in world history that was run by women. The United States will not be the first. You need to get a hold of this stuff. It's out of hand. You need to stop it. And until you do, by basically saying, you know what, we're not doing anything until you prove your accusations, then we'll see which ones are actually credible. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. So which way are we going with the Mueller investigation right now? You may recall that this was a big deal for Democrats and progressives, that we're finally going to investigate Trump, and we're going to get a guy who should be above reproach. Mueller has a lot of good credibility. He also has a lot of conflict of interest, but that's another story. And therefore, we should get to the bottom of whether or not Russia was colluding with Trump and vice versa, and that's why he won the election, even though there has never been, and still is not, a bit of credible evidence to indicate that Russia even influenced the election. They're just allegations that have yet to be proven. Well, what about, they got Flynn to plead guilty, and they got that other guy to do. Those people pled guilty to process crimes. They did not plead guilty to any conspiracy to do anything. You are no closer to demonstrating that President Trump or anyone associated with his transition team or administration had anything to do with the Russians in a fashion or form that constitutes collusion of any kind. That's just a fact. I know people don't like that fact, but it remains a fact. As a matter of fact, their whole investigation is having a public confidence problem. The Hill reports on December 14th, Mueller, FBI, the FBI as well, by the way, face crisis in public confidence. 63% of polled voters believe that the FBI has been resisting providing information to Congress on the Clinton and Trump investigations. This is a remarkable finding for an agency whose new head said a few days ago that the agency was in fine shape. It isn't. 54% say Special Counsel Robert Mueller has conflicts of interest that prevent him from doing an unbiased job, also according to this month's Harvard Capps Harris poll. So given this finding, the silence from the special counsel on the subject has become downright deafening. There are significant findings about an operation that was supposed to bring more objectivity and less partisanship to the Trump-Russia investigation. Clearly, these numbers indicate that there is a crisis in public confidence in both the FBI and Mueller. And of course, they're linked. The FBI and Mueller are linked. He and the previous director of the FBI, James Comey, are very chummy. Mueller himself was a former FBI director who did such a wonderful job in the opinion of the Senate that he not only served a 10-year term but was extended for an additional 2 years. Which is why you have reason to believe, at least some do, that, well, he's really beyond reproach. The problem is he should never have been given the job given his relationship with the guy who appointed him and the guy that was fired as FBI director. It should have gone to someone else who did not have personal relationships. And I was also, if you want to add to that, there are emails now, thousands of emails that Mueller has come across that he's gotten from people associated with Donald Trump, and guess what? There are problems with how he got them. People going so far, unchallenged when they make the statement, that the way he obtained these emails, or that he has these emails, is either inappropriate or a violation of law. And that's not the first time that Mueller would have been charged or alleged to have broken the law as part of his investigation. Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina said the very same thing about the leaks regarding the indictments that came out of this investigation, that they were illegal. And the very least that you can expect out of an investigation that's supposed to be confidential and showing how things may have transpired to hurt the nation is for you not to conduct that investigation in a manner that is itself illegal. How are you going to prove somebody's a criminal by investigating them in a criminal fashion? By definition, everything you get, if you have a case, is going to get thrown out. It's not fruit of the poison tree, it's fruit of the poisoned you. You're poison. By the way, you want to keep talking about issues with Mueller? And there's that guy again, George Soros. Now, George Soros is out there boasting of nationwide riots if Mueller is either fired or if he drops the investigation. The nation's going to just go into riot. Really? No, it won't. If the majority of voters think that the guy has a conflict of interest and can't do the job correctly, why would they riot if he stops doing a job that they don't think he's doing well or should be doing at all? And why is George Soros commenting on this? Oh, well, there is the report that Robert Mueller has investments in hedge funds that are linked to Russia and also to Mr. Soros. Sounds like another conflict of interest, does it not? This is really a mess. This is really a mess. On top of that, you have this report coming out of the New York Post back on the 12th which is really going to make people unhappy. I just recognize that. Ugly as Mueller's investigation may look, it's on track to clear Donald Trump. There was a rush to judgment last week on Peter Strzok, a top FBI counterintelligence agent and one of the lead agents on the Hillary Clinton emails investigation, after revelations that Strzok had exchanged text messages during the 2016 campaign with an FBI lawyer that was pro-Clinton and anti-Trump. The lawyer was Lisa Page, with whom he was having an extramarital affair. You can't make this stuff up. Like Strzok, Page worked on both the Clinton probe and on Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of possible Trump campaign collusion with Russia. So I got a couple of folks who are pro-Clinton, anti-Trump, knocking boots in an adulterous relationship, and these folks are a significant part of your investigation into the president. Really? In light of the obvious appearance of bias, Mueller rightly removed Strzok from the Trump-Russia case. Page was already gone. Nevertheless, Strzok and Mueller were slammed as Clintonian pillars of anti-Trump animus. Not only were there calls for a purge of possibly corrupt bureaucrats in the FBI and Justice Department, but one Fox News host asserted that these government lawyers and agents should be taken out in handcuffs and locked up. That's how bad this is getting, guys. This is really a mess, and not a lightweight mess. It is a mess of the first order. There is no way at this point that you can come out of this with reliable and objective evidence to do anything to anyone. You can't get Clinton because you've screwed the pooch. You can't get Trump because you screwed the pooch. You really can't get anybody. Fox News Insider, also from December 12th. Turley on Mueller probe. Congress should investigate the investigation. You got to remember something. Because Congress is such a bunch of wimps in our day and age, wasn't always the case, but they are now. They don't take up investigative matters that clearly fall within their jurisdiction. They always find someone else or look for someone else to do it for them, so that whatever bias they may have, we don't want to be biased. So they go out and find somebody else who has a bias, and they let them do the investigation. But Mr. Turley, who is a constitutional law professor, had this to say on Fox News channel back on the 12th of December regarding what should happen with the Mueller investigation.
There's new fallout this evening from Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. In recent days, we have reported on a series of troubling reports involving members of Mueller's team who are clearly not fans of the president, bringing into question whether or not they're impartial enough to be on this investigation. So now a top member of the president's legal team says that what's needed in his mind is a second special counsel to keep an eye on, to oversee the investigators. Jay Sekulow told Axios, quote, "The Department of Justice and FBI cannot ignore the multiple problems that have been created by these obvious conflicts of interest. These new revelations require the appointment of a special counsel to investigate," he writes. Jonathan Turley is constitutional law expert and George Washington University law professor and good friend of the program. Jonathan, good to see you tonight. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Martha.
So what do you think about that? Should he do that?
Well, I totally agree with the need for a serious investigation. I find the allegations involving the dossier and the fusion effort to be deeply troubling. I mean, there are false statements that have been made. There's serious conflicts of interest. Having said that, I would not recommend another special counsel. This is the type of thing that Congress can and should investigate. They have jurisdiction over the Justice Department. This is a core concern of whether the Justice Department acted through politically motivated means or purposes. Now, that can change depending on new disclosures. It could also change if the Justice Department continues to refuse to give information to Congress. I've said for years that these committees need to enforce their contempt authority and to start holding these officials guilty of contempt.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unbelievable. You kind of feel bad for members on these committees on the Hill because ever since Benghazi, they request documents. They nicely ask for them. They send things. Now they're doing it here. They have requested many documents with regard to the dossier, whether or not the dossier was used as a precursor or to lay the groundwork for the investigation. They can't seem to get anywhere with getting answers from the FBI on any of that. And then you look at, the different characters that are playing roles in this investigation and the myriad, starting with Bob Mueller and his relationship with James Comey and on down, Andrew Weissman. It starts to look like a team of people who, are obviously very smart, obviously have, wonderful degrees. They're attorneys of great repute. However, their own actions make it appear that they cannot be impartial in this case.
Well, I think that the problem we're seeing emerge is that the conflicts are becoming more the rule than the exception in these investigations. I have no problem with spending millions of dollars, spending copious amounts of time on these investigations. The one thing I don't want is at the end for there to be lingering doubts as to whether any of this matters because of conflicts of interest. And so I think we seriously have to look at that. The Justice Department seriously has to look at it. Right now, the integrity of the Justice Department is at stake, and they're not doing much to correct it.
But who can do that? I guess that's the question, because if the House committees who have the jurisdiction, as you point out, can't get the information that they want, it's no wonder, that Jay Sekulow said maybe we need somebody on the outside.
Well, that may in fact be the only outcome unless they force this issue. I've testified before that Congress needs to enforce contempt authority. And I have to say, to the credit of the Republicans in the House, they are thinking of holding officials in the Republican administration in contempt. That would be the first time in modern times to have a party holding its own administration to account. That would be a good development, given the rather checkered history of contempt of agencies in dealing with Congress.
Great point. Jonathan Turley, thank you, as always. Good to see you tonight.
So we have a messed up investigation that hasn't proven a thing that matters and seems to be corrupt and biased with multiple conflicts of interest from top to bottom throughout. And the only people who still want it to go on are those who are on the same side of the ideological spectrum as George Soros. That should be enough to get your attention, because it definitely has mine. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that we'll be back with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
The type of occupation an American now will dictate her style of life or death we as Americans will experience in the future. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, the recent tainted election in Alabama is a sad reflection of what has permeated the republic. First and foremost, the depth of deception is deeper than even I had imagined. Who would have thought that the voters of Alabama would choose outright socialist Doug Jones, who was in total lockstep with the vision of former President Barack Hussein Obama, over Judge Roy Moore, who with his flaws would at least be an ally of President Trump's laudable efforts to literally make America great again. They knew Moore's long history of patriotism and understanding the true liberty, recognition of our God-given rights of self-protection, lower taxes, etc. Personally, I believe that Jones got a little help from the allowing of convicts to vote and alleged tampering with electronic voting machines, but things are the way they are. The deep state and swamp dwellers are feverishly trying to stop President Trump from successfully restoring American greatness. The one and only way they will be defeated is if we the people are more fully informed and will not be fooled into voting for people like Jones, who literally would destroy your rights and your republic. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, welcome to Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we've had a manufactured crisis over at the CDC. This, of course, spun up by news organizations which are hostile to the Trump administration. Let's hear this from an organization that does not seem to be as hostile to the Trump administration. Watch It News reported on it in this fashion.
Officials at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the very agency tasked with saving and protecting the lives of the most vulnerable, are now under order by the Trump administration to stop using words including vulnerable in 2018 budget documents. In a 90-minute briefing, policy analysts at the nation's leading public health institute were presented with the menu of 7 banned words, and analysts said, on the list, diversity, fetus, transgender, vulnerable, entitlement, science-based, and evidence-based. Alternative word choices reportedly were presented in some cases. For instance, in lieu of evidence-based or science-based, an analyst might say, CDC bases its recommendations on science and consideration with community standards and wishes, the source said. But those working on the Zika virus's effect on developing fetuses may be at loss for appropriate or acceptable words. The reaction in the room was incredulous, the longtime CDC analyst reported. A Health and Human Services spokesman disputed the report.
So that's how that plays out with Washington. Now, this is based on a Washington Post report, and the Washington Post is notorious in its criticism, often over the top, biased, and sometimes lacking any objective evidence or fact criticism of the current administration. They reported on this on Friday. The Trump administration is prohibiting officials at the nation's top health agency from using a list of 7 words or phrases, fetus, transgender among them, in official documents being prepared for next year's budget. Stop. This is only talking about a budget recommendation. Why are we talking about fetus and transgender in a budget recommendation? Think about that. Policy analysts at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta were told of the list of forbidden terms. This is not what you're hearing from the administration. This is what you're hearing from the Washington Post, reportedly from someone who is within CDC. This was in a meeting with senior CDC officials who oversee the budget, according to an analyst who took part in the 90-minute briefing. The 7 terms are vulnerable, entitlement, diversity, transgender, fetus, evidence-based, and science-based. In some instances, the analysts were given alternative phrases. Instead of science-based or evidence-based, suggested phrase is CDC bases its recommendation on science in consideration with community standards and wishes. Notice how they're putting that as a bad thing, because here's the thing. When you see evidence-based and science-based, this is the same dog whistle words or phrases that you see in debates For example, with climate change, where you had the last president saying the science is settled when it's far from it. This is science-based. This is evidence-based. Based is one thing. Evidence, period, is another. The science says this. No, our recommendations are based on science, but they're not necessarily totally concurrent with science. The same is true with evidence, particularly when you're talking about left-leaning agenda items. Diversity, what does that have to do with disease control? Transgender, what does that have to do with disease control? Entitlement, what does that mean? Vulnerable? Well, who the heck isn't vulnerable to disease? Name a disease that is going on in this country that someone is immune from. I don't know that. The Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the CDC, will continue to use the best scientific evidence available to improve the health of all Americans, HHS spokesman Matt Lloyd told the Post. HHS also strongly encourages the use of outcome and evidence data in program evaluations and budget decisions, not evidence-based data. Can we have some data? Can we have some outcomes? Can we have something that we can document and prove, as opposed to you saying, here's our recommendation. We're not going to show you where it came from, but we want you to believe that it is based on evidence. Just trust us. Give us the money. The question of how to address such issues as sexual orientation, gender identity, and abortion rights, all of which received significant visibility under the Obama administration. Please explain to me what sexual orientation has to do, unless you're talking about HIV, with disease. Gender identity, what does that have to do with disease? Abortion rights, is pregnancy a disease? Actually, in the minds of some progressives, it seems to be. This is interesting. But they're saying the question of how to address those issues has surfaced repeatedly during this current administration. This is the strange thing that you have going on here. How does the CDC become the place where you're talking about progressive policy and dog whistle words when you're trying to protect the health of all Americans? Well, there's an answer to that question. This is also a report from The Hill, but this is from October 2016, a few weeks before the election. The CDC is being influenced by corporate and political interests. Really? When you're being funded by the government, when you get your money from the taxpayers, and your job is to, as part of the Department of Health and Human Services, help identify and control diseases and prevent them, why are corporate interests influencing you? Political interests I can understand to an extent. Here's the report. Concerns about the inner workings of the CDC have been mounting in recent months amid disclosures of cozy corporate alliances. I wonder what type of words these corporate people might use to describe where the CDC should focus its effort. I don't know. Could it be evidence-based? Whose evidence? The corporate interest evidence? Science-based. Whose science? Vulnerable. Who determines that they're vulnerable? Are you following this? Now, a group of more than a dozen senior scientists have reportedly lodged an ethics complaint alleging the federal agency is being influenced by corporate and political interests in ways that shortchange taxpayers, and there you have it. This was weeks before the election. Weeks. A group calling itself CDC Scientists Preserving Integrity, Diligence, and Ethics in Research put a list of complaints in writing in a letter to CDC Chief of Staff and provided a copy of the letter to the public watchdog organization U.S. Right to Know. The members of the group have elected to file the complaint anonymously for fear of retribution. Wow, I wonder how that didn't make it into the report from the Washington Post. It appears that our mission is being influenced and shaped by outside parties and rogue interests, and congressional intent for our agency is being circumvented by... Whoa! Hold up. The political influence isn't coming from Congress. It is in contradiction to what Congress, who provides the funding for CDC, would have them do. What concerns us most is that it is becoming the norm, not the rare exception. These questionable and unethical practices threaten to undermine our credibility and reputation as a trusted leader in public health. This is not the Trump administration. This is not candidate Donald Trump saying the CDC is corrupt. These are people within the CDC saying you are so corrupt, we're going to write a letter and we're going to make sure it gets published anonymously so that everybody knows what we think, but we're going to try to protect ourselves because we know how you guys operate. You don't find that somewhat interesting? I do. I find it fascinating. What was the administration's response to all this? Because that kind of got lost a little bit. So what do we have here? This is from the New York Times, the uproar over the words there. We touched on it a little bit in the Washington Post report. But according to the administration, the assertion that HHS has banned words is a complete mischaracterization of discussions regarding the budget formulation process. HHS will continue to use the best scientific evidence available to improve the health of all Americans. HHS also strongly encourages the use of outcome and evidence data in program evaluations and budget decisions. Maybe you missed it, but they're trying to tell you that in previous submissions, they may not have seen evidence of them doing that. They simply would use buzzwords and catchphrases and dog whistle terminology that was comfortable for the left and for progressives. And as a result, that got them over when Obama was president. There's a new sheriff in town. It becomes very simple. Either demonstrate this scientifically so that we can protect the interests of taxpayers, or you're going to have a hard time getting your budget assessments and recommendations considered. Is there something wrong with that? I'm having a hard time thinking what it might be. But what you have to understand is that this is about making progressivism accountable. And anytime you make progressivism accountable for its use or twisting of words, then it becomes mute. Progressivism can only speak in terms of what it twists, not in terms of what things are. Vulnerable, entitlement, diversity, transgender, fetus, which is simply baby, evidence-based and science-based. Can you imagine writing up a budget assessment where those are terms that feature prominently in your request for tax dollars? I cannot. So all that's happening is a few of the progressive left's dog whistle words and phrases are getting put aside so that there can be more objective language when you're going after taxpayer money. They'll have to actually explain things if they want their budget proposals considered. This is a very small example of the American people winning under the Trump administration. because it means that to the extent the report is in any way, shape, or form true, we're no longer accepting the enemy's lexicon. You're going to define things in the Queen's English so that we all understand what we're talking about, instead of just you and your corporate sponsors and your internal political operatives who are aligned with corporate sponsors to make sure that they get their agenda and that the American people and their congressional representatives don't necessarily get what they thought they were paying for. Small victory, but it's a victory just the same. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, there were voting irregularities in Alabama. Is anyone surprised? Let's make this very clear. Voter fraud in the United States, particularly committed by the Democrat Party, and it doesn't really seem to help them all that much if you look at their track record in elections over the last 8-9 years. But voter fraud in America is an open secret. It is as open as it's an open secret in the same way that Hollywood described what Harvey Weinstein was doing as an open secret. Everyone knows that Democrats cheat. They've been cheating since Kennedy was elected. Richard Nixon could have easily contested the 1960 election just based on what happened in the Chicago area and in parts of Texas where Lyndon Johnson was from. But let's take a look here at specifically the Alabama Senate race, recently decided in favor of, or maybe decided, ostensibly decided, in favor of Doug Jones over Judge Roy Moore. Moore, and this is according to Fox 31 in Alabama, an Associated Press report, Moore looking into numerous reported cases of voter fraud after Alabama Senate race loss. Roy Moore told supporters the battle is not over in Alabama's Senate race, even though President Donald Trump and others have called on him to concede. Of course, these are the same people who were calling on him to get out of the race, by the way, and the same people who were backing Luther Strange back in the primary. They were not speaking for Alabamans then. I'm not certain that they're speaking for Alabamans now. Moore sent a fundraising email to supporters asking for contributions to his election integrity fund so he could investigate reports of voter fraud. I also wanted to let you know that this battle is not over, he wrote. Democrat Doug Jones on Tuesday defeated Moore by about 20,000 votes, or 1.5%, according to unofficial returns. But Moore, who has been accused of sexual misconduct with teenage girls when he was in his 30s, has not yet conceded the heated Alabama race to fill the seat that did belong at one time to Jeff Sessions, who is now the Attorney General. You had 8 women who came out and lied on Judge Roy Moore. They simply lied and said that he did something that was improper 3 or 4 decades ago. Now, Roy Moore has been married for more than 3 decades to a woman that is, I believe, 14 years his junior. So if you want to say that Judge Roy Moore has always liked younger women, then I don't see how anybody would dispute that. But he also married a younger woman and has been with her for, I believe, 35 years. And in all that time, no one has had anything to say about Judge Roy Moore and sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual anything. And he's been in public service for the majority of that time. But that doesn't matter to progressives, particularly in the current Me Too environment. Look, every lying chica from 30 years ago does not deserve to be heard. We've already talked about this with Bobby Scott, who I hope never sets foot in Congress again after the next election. But I want him to be defeated at the polls. To have some Anita Hill lookalike come out of the woodwork and say, he touched my leg without my permission 4 years ago and I got fired, without a stitch of anything that is corroborative of that account. That's not the way I want the Clown Brown caucus to go down, as much as I want them to go down. But what is really going on here? Well, there's really no evidence. There's evidence that folks came in from out of state, voted, and went home. Well, that's just an allegation. Now, this is what kills me. Democrats love allegations that support their ideology or support their perspective, because we're still talking about Trump colluding with Russia. There's nothing there to support that. Never has been anything there to support that. And you got a special counsel who's got his own problems, who still can't demonstrate that that happened. And even though he has access to all the lawyers and investigators that he wants, and has apparently unlimited access to federal money to conduct this nonsense investigation, that still can't prove that Donald Trump did what progressives want to say he did, because it didn't happen. So we know that allegations are not something that Democrats have a problem with, as long as they're the ones making them. Do we believe that Democrats cheat in elections? Most of the dead people who vote in elections vote Democrat. Most of the convicted felons in states where it is illegal for convicted felons to vote, like Minnesota, vote Democrat. Otherwise, Al Franken would never have made it to the Senate. We know that illegal aliens vote. We know this. 14% of people who are not citizens in this country are registered to vote. And if you go along with the common perception that there are 11 to 12 million non-residents, and that's just illegal aliens, who are in this country and they're registered to vote, we're talking about more than 1.5 million people registered to vote. How many illegal aliens do you believe are voting Republican? Seriously? Oh, we don't know. You never know when the allegation exposes your ratchetness, do you, progressive Democrat? But when the allegation is unproven and demonstrates your point, it must be true. Well, Donald Trump has admitted to sexual assault. No, he didn't. He basically talked about how silly women were in the face of famous people. They'll let you do anything. He never said that he had done anything. He just said they would let, but it doesn't matter. But here's some things that do matter. In Mobile County, evidence of voter fraud was coming in as those results in Mobile seem to be coming in late. Judge Roy Moore is calling for all the votes to be counted in the Alabama Senate election, refusing to concede. He's down 1.7 points at the time of this report. Only needs to come within a half a point to spark a statewide recount. Absentee ballots from military service members have still not been counted. Mobile County, a heavily pro-Jones county, tabulated its votes later than the pro-Moore counties and eventually gave Jones the lead. Let me help you out with that. The folks in Mobile took a look around and said, all right, what's the count? All right, let's find out what Mr. Jones needs, and let's make sure we come up with those votes. That's very interesting to me. The Alabama, here is the, oh my gosh, this is so good. The Alabama Supreme Court shot down a lower court ruling Tuesday, the day of the election, by the way, requiring counties to preserve their digital voting records. Let me read that again. The Alabama Supreme Court overturned a lower court ruling on Tuesday, the day of the election, and that ruling required counties to preserve their digital voting records. Thus, the Supreme Court is allowing counties to destroy their voter records. The Moore legal team will need to jump on this development fast to protect those records. Evidence of voter fraud exists in this election. Democratic activists made a last-minute push to get out the vote against Roy Moore in Alabama by encouraging African Americans in Mississippi to vote in the wrong state. You act like that wouldn't happen. You don't know Southern black Democrats. Sources on the ground in Alabama confirm that these tactics are real and they have been used by supporters of Democrat Doug Jones. They were also used to support Thad Cochran last year against somebody who was a Tea Party member, or a couple of years back in the primary involving him. Big League Politics received evidence of a Reddit call for African Americans in Mississippi to make a short trip to Alabama on December 12th. You can't make this stuff up. You really can't. Similar calls have been made on Reddit for African Americans in other nearby states, including Georgia and Tennessee. In other words, we're going to bring the Negro, KNEE-GROW voter, who ain't got no business voting in Alabama, into Alabama so that they can vote for Doug Jones. You think that's not possible? My goodness. So you forgot that. Did you forget about the stuff that went on in Michigan? Did you forget about the folks who were found to have been illegal aliens voting in California? And all those folks are voting for Democrats. In Michigan, it was in Wayne County. You had more people voting in Wayne County than are even on the rolls. It's amazing. Had some of that happening in Alabama as well, where you have so many votes coming in the precinct, more people voting in a county than even live in the county, or at least are registered in the county. But no, you don't need to preserve any records to see what happened. Are you serious? I want to read that line one more time. The Alabama Supreme Court overturned a lower court ruling requiring counties to preserve digital voting records. Does that make sense to anybody? I mean, tell me. Here's another report, same source, bigleaguepolitics.com. The Alabama Supreme Court ruled Tuesday that counties in Alabama can destroy their digital voting records in the Roy Moore-Doug Jones race and will not have to preserve those records. Following an 11th hour order instructing voting officials in Alabama to keep the digital ballots generated in Tuesday's controversial Senate election, the state Supreme Court has issued a stay to block that decision. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just let the votes be counted, keep the records, and decide this after the election? And in the meantime, nothing is lost. The order to preserve the records was issued by the Montgomery County Circuit Court on Monday afternoon, less than 24 hours before the voting was set to begin, and the stay that will effectively nullify that order was issued late Monday night. All counties employing digital ballot scanners in the December 12, 2017 election are hereby ordered to set their voting machines to save all processed images in order to preserve all digital ballot images, Montgomery court order stated. Please explain to me what could possibly be wrong with that. The order came just hours before votes were counted in the race. Democrat Doug Jones took a commanding lead in the Senate race Tuesday night as it became clear that Mobile County was going to be the last county to come in. Mobile County, a heavily pro-Jones area, in other words, that's where all the Negroes live, tabulated its ballots far slower than the more red counties elsewhere in the state. Why? Because they needed to know how much they needed to get before they decided to count their ballots and make sure. What is it that Joseph Stalin said about this entire thing? It's just enough that the people know that there was an election. The people who cast the votes determine nothing. The people who count the votes determine everything. As long as you have progressives in America, you do not and will not have an honest election. You cannot. You cannot. Because that's not who they are. They're not honest. They don't even pretend to be honest. But you allow them to compete. Why? I really don't know. I really don't know. But you do. And I wish you wouldn't do that, but there's nothing we can do there now. But notice this. You get to the point where you cannot even trust the courts to make a prudent decision that leans toward equity or a fair election. Why wouldn't you want people to keep those ballots? Well, AL.com, Alabama.com, they gave an explanation. In final order, court rules that Alabama can destroy digital records, voting records after all. Alabama is allowed to destroy digital voting records created at the polls during the Senate election after all. At 1:36 p.m. on Monday, Montgomery Court issued an order directing Alabama election officials to preserve all digital ballot images. But at 4:32, attorneys for the Alabama Secretary of State and the State Administrator of Elections filed an emergency motion to stay that order, which the state Supreme Court granted minutes after Merrill and Packard's motion was filed. By granting the did you hear that? Look who was opposed to preserving digital voting records. The Secretary of State and the State Administrator of Elections. And John Merrill is a Republican. Merrill and Packard's attorney ordered or argued in the emergency motion Monday that the two officials do not have authority to maintain such records. What? Or to require local officials to do so. Plaintiffs therefore lack standing. The circuit court lacks jurisdiction, and the order is a nullity. Although a nullity, it will, if not stayed, cause confusion among election officials and be disrupted to an election scheduled for the next day. But Priscilla Duncan, attorney for 4 Alabama voters who sued the state in an attempt to force election officials to preserve the digital records, said Tuesday that their argument was spurious and misleading, that they don't have the authority to tell election officials across the state what to do. Well, they're already telling them what to do. They're telling them to destroy. And that will cause a bunch of confusion at the polls, but the voters wouldn't even know if they changed their retention policy. Merrill declined to comment directly on the case in a phone interview, but he did state that though the state does not preserve the digital ballot images, it does maintain the original paper ballots. The records for federal elections are required by law to be reserved for 22 months. But Duncan said that the paper ballots aren't really what's counted unless there's a statewide recount, which would be cost prohibitive. Do you get this? The people in the state conspired against Roy Moore, and the Democrats conspired to the point where they got people from out of state to vote against him, mostly black. I'm just going to state it, mostly black. You put all this together with the history of Democrats in my lifetime, actually before my lifetime. I wasn't around on the planet during the 1960 election when people knew that the Democrats were cheating in that presidential election. This has been going on all my days. Democrats cheat when it comes election time. They did it here, and they kept the people's choice, at least the people of Alabama's choice, out of the Senate. Will it stand up? Well, it looks like they've pulled it off. That's the interesting thing about voter fraud. It is one of those crimes where even after you've proven it, you don't keep the result that it causes from happening, and you simply have to suffer it. You may send people to jail, but you don't remove the person who was wrongfully elected. This is why Democrats are so opposed to voter ID laws, because those laws could actually result in their cheating being exposed to the point where elections that they tried to steal would result in Democrat losses. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show, and this is just off the chain silly, in my opinion, and that is they're actually talking about, and it seems to be serious discussions based on the tone and on the people involved. They're actually talking about bringing in UN peacekeepers into the city of Chicago to deal with the homicide situation there. Now, let's not forget that not long after the election, I believe it was back in January, Donald Trump said that if Chicago didn't handle their business, that he would send in federal support. I believe he was open to sending in the National Guard. Of course, Rahm Emanuel is the mayor of Chicago, was opposed to that. And I can guarantee you that a lot of the black politicians, the black elected officials in Chicago are similarly opposed to anything that would actually demonstrate how incompetent they are when it comes to public safety within that city. But residents of Chicago who are living on the south side and other parts of the city where this violence is just out of control are like, yeah, send in the feds. President Trump, send in the feds. Now, what we ought to remember is that for the federal troops to come in, the real problem for Chicago, or for the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, is he is committed against the best interests of his black residents, at least, if not all of the city's residents. He is committed to maintaining a sanctuary city policy. And he believes, rightly or wrongly, that if National Guard troops, federal troops, set foot in Chicago, then that policy is not going to be maintained, because those troops will be there with a mission, and they will also be looking to enforce, or to at least uphold, federal law. If you commit a crime, we're going to deal with you. And if you don't belong in the country, I'm pretty sure that anyone that the National Guard picks up who is an illegal alien committing a crime is going to get on the next thing smoking before a federal judge for a deportation hearing. I could almost promise you that. Rahm Emanuel is so committed to sanctuary city policy that he doesn't care how many black folks die in the process. 760 murders last year, on pace to break that. That was a record. On pace to break that record this year. And where is he? He's fighting the president. Now, the president he hasn't sent in federal troops. But he did back in June send in additional ATF resources and some other resources as well, a small number, 20, I believe, ATF agents and I think 4 ballistics experts, something along those lines, in order to try to do something in the face of what neither the city, the county, nor the state has chosen to do. They're not really acting. They're treating this like it's, well, you know what, to be honest with you, it is. It's their normal. We kill people in Chicago. We kill black people in Chicago. That's what we do. Well, there is one local official in Chicago who seems to have a different opinion, but his proposed solution just doesn't make sense at all.
Concerns over Chicago violence now prompting a search for solutions that's taking one local leader to the Big Apple, and it's not for a visit to the New York City Police. Eyewitness News political reporter Craig Walls here now with more on an idea that is crossing beyond the state lines. Craig.
Ellen, some people are calling it a far-fetched idea, but one county commissioner says desperate times require desperate measures, which is why today he took his concerns about Chicago's shootings and murders to the United Nations.
I'm hoping to appeal to the UN to actually come to Chicago and meet with victims of violence and maybe even possibly help out in terms of peacekeeping efforts.
Cook County Commissioner Richard Boykin boarded a plane to New York City for a meeting with an Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. It's a meeting that's been planned for more than a month and stems from disconcerting violence numbers seen in Chicago this year, violence which is felt particularly hard in many African American communities.
We've had over 600 people killed by gun violence already this year alone. That is a huge number. In my community of Austin, we've had 450 people shot and 80 people killed this year alone. And so we have to do more to protect these communities.
The mayor's office says the call for UN peacekeepers is a political stunt. The police superintendent says it's a nice idea, but not the answer to Chicago's violence.
I appreciate the commissioner's energy and his anxiousness to help reduce the gun violence in Chicago. I really do commend that. But at the end of the day, the UN has no jurisdiction here. You know, they really have no jurisdiction in this country.
Other suggestions for helping Chicago police have included bringing in the National Guard, but that too has been dismissed as a gimmick or not practical. Johnson says despite a record number of murders last year, new policing strategies are having an impact.
This year, we are down about 110 in raw numbers from the murders last year and about over 700 shootings down. So I'm pleased with it. It's not cause for celebration, but it is showing progress.
From the airport tonight in New York City, handing back to Chicago, Commissioner Boykin told me that he's had a 40-minute meeting and went very well. He said he learned the UN is working on a global youth violence report, which should be released soon. And he says the Assistant Secretary General said he would be happy to come to Chicago when that's done and share the findings.
Does anybody else understand how ridiculous and dangerous that is? You are going to appeal to foreign nationals to come into a city in America and kill American citizens in order to stop violence among American citizens. That's what you're talking about. Now, let's not forget this is the same UN that just got 12 folks killed, smoked in the Congo. Peacekeepers, UN peacekeepers. They can't even keep themselves safe. But you think you're going to take them to Chirac with those blue hats, those little blue berets, making them about as visible as anyone can be, and with the gangbangers and the other actors who are not acting in the public good in Chicago are going to see that, and they're going to do what? Lay down their arms? No, they're going to recognize that they don't have nothing to lose by killing these folks. Because if a UN peacekeeper comes into Chicago and kills someone as part of their quote-unquote peacekeeping activities, don't act like that doesn't happen, by the way. What is the recourse for the American family or the American citizens that are either shot or the family members of someone who is killed by a UN peacekeeper on American soil, brought here by local government? Do you think they're going to operate here without having some form of immunity to protect them from the consequences, normal legal consequences of their actions? You really think that? Would you do that? Would you come here under those circumstances as a peacekeeper? Do you really think UN peacekeepers go in and when they kill somebody, they're held to some type of standard of, oh, you got to answer for that crime? Do you really think that that's what happens? I assure you, no. No. Now, again, I would bring to your attention the fact that the war of words, if you want to call it, between Donald Trump and Rahm Emanuel, mayor of Chicago, has been going on for a while. And Donald Trump has made it clear, if you don't do something, I will, speaking directly to the mayor. And back in June, Donald Trump did this.
President Donald Trump is, quote, sending feds to Chicago to fight gun violence, despite there being a number of federal agents working there already. On Friday, the Department of Justice and the Chicago Police Department announced that 20 agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, and 4 ballistic specialists had teamed up with state and city police to create the Crime Gun Strike Force. The city has been asking for more federal help fighting crime and gun violence since the start of Trump's term, and even when former President Barack Obama was in office. New Strike Force members will join 41 ATF agents already in Chicago. The Strike Force will target the illegal flow of guns into the city as well as repeat gun crime offenders. But in Friday's White House press briefing, Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said Chicago's crime problem had more to do with, quote, morality than gun control. And some Chicago officials are frustrated by the administration's response to crime in the city. A spokesperson for Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel told the New York Times, quote, if the president was as interested in taking action on public safety as he is in tweeting about it, we would have seen these resources months ago.
That, to me, is a very cheeky response from Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Well, if the president were serious about this, we would have seen these resources. Well, when are you going to get serious about it, Mayor? The people are dying in your city. You're the one who's had a murder rate higher than that of, I believe, New York and Los Angeles combined. You have more homicides there than those two cities combined in 2016, averaging more than 2 people killed per day in your city. Average of more than 2 people per day killed in the city. When are you going to do something that's going to stop the violence? What have you done? And to say that, let's be honest, this is not really the president's problem. It's not a federal issue. If you want it to be a federal issue, all you have to do is say the word. He told you back in January he wanted to do something, and you poo-pooed it, and basically you didn't want to throw that over because you are so intent on being a sanctuary city that you're not concerned about being a mayor who looks after public safety. This is not Donald Trump's problem. This is not Donald Trump's issue. The fact that he is willing to do that, and there are people in Chicago, black people in Chicago, who are very open. Matter of fact, they're clamoring for this president to send someone in there to do what local officials will not. The police superintendent, hey, we're making a little bit of progress. Tell that to the folks who are still burying people at the ridiculous rate that you've seen in Chicago in 2016 and 2017. Tell them that you're making progress. I don't think it's going to work there. This is what progressivism gives you. They lead you to a situation where their policies, which are morally bankrupt. The White House nailed it. Sarah Huckabee Sanders nailed it back when she did. Chicago is morally bankrupt. And you can say what you want. No, you're morally bankrupt. At least the black population there has a serious moral problem because they're killing each other. They're not even necessarily reaching out across ethnic lines to kill people. They're just wiping themselves out. That is a spiritual and moral sickness that is off the chain. But since they're just black people killing themselves and Rahm Emanuel's not black, I guess it's really not that important. He's looking to make sure he has an international diversity of people from different countries, so the American blacks who kill each other are really not that important. You really need to understand what you're up against when you deal with progressives. They want the country away from Americans and Americanism by any means necessary. And if they have you killing yourselves, that'll work for them. And until you put them out of political power and stare them down and tell them you know who they are, this is going to continue. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. There will be no show next week, so you can celebrate Christmas. I can celebrate as well. In the meantime, we'll see you. Oh, gosh. Nope, we won't be here on New Year's Day either. So we will see you in January. And in the meantime, you do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.